Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy lore breakdown for the first anthology book that I will be covering. We are now on the third to last story, Little Horus, where we get a deep dive into the character of Horus Aximand, after the breaking of the Mournival, after the betrayal, and after what he thought was the murder of Torgarden and Garviel Loken. It was hinted at quite forcefully and insistently that Horus Aximand was perhaps not entirely down with the whole Horus Heresy, the whole betrayal thing, and particularly not the splitting of the Mournival. He was described throughout the early books as looking haunted, as looking almost a little bit confused at times, as if he couldn't quite figure out how it could possibly have come to this. His lot within the Legion after the betrayal appears to have changed a little bit. He is still a member of the Mournival, although whether or not the Mournival even exists is a subject of a little debate between Horus and Abaddon. They mention also that his name, Little Horus, was both affectionate and mocking, whilst before I don't think it was any real mockery intended with the name, perhaps a little bit of playful banter, but not mockery. It's an interesting choice of words. Anywho, Horus, this is going to get confusing real quick, Little Horus is trying to convince Abaddon that the Mournival is still needed. Abaddon, on his part, doesn't quite see the necessity, and he is of the opinion that the Mournival failed to do what it was supposed to do with the quote-unquote betrayal of Garviel Loken and Torgarden. An interesting point of view, certainly. Whilst Little Horus' argument is that the Mournival worked just fine, it exposed the rift within the Legion, and this allowed Lupercal to act upon that divide and stomp out those who would not follow. The mechanism of the Mournival still functioned, even if the eventual end result of the Mournival's function was the destruction of half of the Mournival, along with a significant portion of the Legion. As Little Horus puts it, people failed us, not the Mournival. This seems convincing enough for Abaddon, convincing enough. Abaddon immediately tries to maneuver to get his own boys into the Mournival. Little Horus, of course, whilst not stating so outright, realizes that this would defeat the entire point of the Mournival. The idea of it was to provide balanced counsel to the Primarch, and if the Mournival was simply stacked with those who obeyed the words of Abaddon, well, it would not be a particularly balanced form of counsel. This, too, I find interesting. So, Little Horus is saying, part of his argument is balanced counsel not more important now than ever? Which seems reasonable if you believe that Horus is actually waging this crusade for the reasons that he has put forth. The propaganda narrative, shall we say, that Horus is not betraying the Emperor, Horus has been betrayed. This is not a war of his choosing, this is a war that has been forced upon him. And Little Horus clings to this, I might go so far as to say. He clearly wishes to believe that he's not the bad guy in this story, and so balanced counsel, of course, makes a great deal of sense. If you are genuinely trying to right an unjust action, if you're trying to put the Imperium back together in the proper fashion, then surely balanced counsel will be necessary, especially considering the ever-increasing influence over the Warmaster from such persons as Erebus, for example. Yes, one would probably be wise to be a little bit careful around the word bearers and their like. And as the Warmaster seeks ever more ethereal forms of counsel, balance would probably have been rather useful. Lupercal does not directly oppose this idea, though he doesn't seem necessarily enthused either. He simply allows it to happen, possibly in an act of attempting to humor his captains, or maybe even possibly because he thinks this will be a good pet project for Aximand, who has, I mean, if we can see it, Horus sure as hell can, been acting a little bit wishy-washy as of late, less than entirely dedicated, shall we say. This is also demonstrated by the fact that little Horus has begun to dream, something that apparently was a virtual unknown within the Sons of Horus, Abaddon going so far as to stating that dreams were a sign of weakness. Little Horus kept this to himself because, well, if Abaddon sees it as a sign of weakness, you probably best keep it secret, at least until you know where the wind is blowing the crazed topknot that particular morning. The dream was always the same thing. It was the events of the day, recreated precisely, except for the presence of a figure, a person. Although little Horus could not tell who, or even if it was indeed a human, or what it was, all little Horus could make out was this individual's breathing. And it would appear close to him and far away, subtle or overpowering, and it would intrude upon the recollected memories of the day. He gives one example when he recalls a meeting with Lupercal, where he seemingly sees the person standing in the room, and it's like, don't you see him? Don't you see? And then he wakes up. Alright. That is certainly a pretty overt sign of a troubled psyche, absolutely. After this, we get a nice little action sequence where the Sons of Horus are taking on a small group of White Scars and Iron Hands. This is all, not particularly lore-intensive or interesting from that point of view, though there is a bit of a derpy thing here. The Iron Hands, a favored lieutenant of one of their chiefs, decides to spring an ambush. The entire reason why they were on the planet were to try and entice Lupercal to lead the assault personally, utilizing a highly valuable military asset as cover, assuming that the Sons of Horus would try to take it intact instead of simply just leveling the whole goddamn thing. A sensible assumption, as the Sons of Horus do just that, try to take it with sheer manpower. The ambush is launched by the Iron Hand, and only the Iron Hand. He kills one of the Sons of Horus, a high-ranking member of Aximand's command squad, I believe, before being killed in turn by Aximand, after which the rest of the ambush then reveals itself. Why? The book makes it sound as if the White Scars were in the same room where little Horus and the Iron Hand were fighting, and they just simply stood there, disguised, waiting until little Horus actually killed this Iron Hand. Why? Okay. You could supposedly make the argument that they were waiting to see if Horus, personally, would appear, but surely they have Vox speeds in their helmets. They would, at this point, know that there had been no sighting of the Warmaster leading the assault. Were they expecting him to teleport down or something? Or arrive in a drop pod? Or... it doesn't seem to make sense. They just stood there, watched the Iron Hand be killed, and then tried to do something about it, and failed in the process. Whereas if they had all moved at once, seeing as little Horus was heavily pushed just by the Iron Hand alone, they would have succeeded in killing him. A company captain, a member of the Mournival, a member of the Inner Circle, and surely they must have known that was who he was. Little Horus gives us an idea of how the Space Marines are identifying one another. Due to the fact that they were, of course, sharing databases up until recently, he is able to use his battle helm to scan the face of his opponent, the markings on his armor, etc., the layout, the design of it, and then come up with an identification of the warrior he is facing. Surely the White Scars and the Iron Hand would have access to the exact same technology and realize that whilst it certainly wasn't the Warmaster, this was still a pretty neat consolatory prize. It's a bit of a dumb scene, played more for drama rather than actual realism, which is always something that annoys me a little bit. Anywho, little Horus survives the ambush and returns victorious to finally discover the person in his dreams. Oh, and he gets his face sliced off by a razor-sharp sword as well, and then it gets sewed back on, and apparently the guy sewing it back on fucked up, so his face never sat quite right again. Which is... okay. I guess the Legiones Apothecaries of the Sons of Horus just aren't that good at their job, I suppose. It also, well, the reality is, of course, it's for poetic effect, isn't it? He has now confronted his dream enemy, and he has been forever changed both by the treachery and by his clear and apparent trauma. The breathing in his dreams comes from Garviel Loken. And this relieves little Horus. Like, oh great, it's Loken. Well, that's not an issue. I can't be afraid of him, because he had been feeling a sense of fear at this unexplained phenomenon. But now that it had been explained, well, it's just Loken, and Loken's dead. You can't be afraid of somebody who's dead. Ah, yes. Yes, indeed. If I were a betting man, I would put quite a quantity of coin on little Horus getting quite the shock in the distant future. Then we have the second to last story, and also my favourite from this anthology, The Iron Within, which introduces us to Warsmith Dantioch, who is actually one of my more favourite characters in the Horus Heresy, because he has a certain character to him. He is a space marine that has been affected by the warping field of the Hrud, reducing him to an aged and withered form, constantly racked by debilitating coughs. And yet he still maintains the mantra of the Iron Legion, iron within, iron without, and refuses to show any weakness or to retreat. He also remains loyal where the rest of his legion turns, or, well, there is actually at least one other example of a loyalist Iron Warriors formation, and honestly, the Iron Warriors probably had quite a few formations that remained loyal, simply because they were scattered throughout the Imperium, disassociated from the Legion and their Primarch, and Petarabo, well, he was hardly the warmest of individuals. Indeed, Dantioch views it as his solemn duty not to obey his Primarch's every wish, but instead to actually show him why he is wrong. He specifically mentions that the Iron Warrior's duty, when Petarabo aligns with Horus, is not to side with him out of blind loyalty, but instead to demonstrate to him why this is wrong and why it is treason and so on. It is also probably by far the best, just action-y story in the entire anthology. A lot of the other ones try to be very, very clever, and most of them are undone by that attempt at cleverness, whereas The Iron Within It has a little bit of subterfuge in it, absolutely. It has a little bit of trickery. It has a little bit of double blind, absolutely. But mostly, it's just a really cool story of a really cool battle. Of this handful of Iron Warriors defending this incredible fortification that is hanging upside down in the cavern roof of a massive planetoid close to, a massive asteroid with all kinds of natural defenses, and they hold out for a year and a Terran day, making an entire Iron Warriors Grand Company bleed for every square inch captured. It's a really neat story. It is a really, really cool action story. And that is, by and large, some of the things that 40k do best. It even has a nice little twist at the end, where it shows you the hopelessness of the situation, and then, through a beautifully executed Keikakudori, it turns around. See, the just as planned thing can be good, and it can be bad, just like the Alpha Legion. The Alpha Legion can be the most incredibly cliched of forces, used as little more than a flat-out plot point to appear at some unspecified point to go like, aha! You were dancing to my tune all along! And there's usually no indication that that was actually the case, but here, Dantiok has prepared the stage. He has laid out his plan. All of these things make sense from the plan that he has laid out, from the strategy that he has created, and from the ideology and theory that he espouses. His just as planned is not just a deus ex machina, it fits logically into the story as a last gasp attempt. And even then, it is only a last resort that, well, it needs a certain degree of luck to work out. It requires certain situations to have come to pass, and Dantiok himself was far from convinced that it was going to have to work. They had to employ a bit of subtlety, a bit of surprise, and of course also the presence of an ultramarine champion to actually succeed with this last-ditch effort. It is my favorite story of all of them, and Dantiok, well, we will be seeing a bit more of him. This is another thing that I want to see more explored in the Horus Heresy, the tales of the formations that actually stayed loyal, because there were quite a few. Nowhere near as many as turned traitor, obviously, and in the case of many of the legions, those who would have remained loyal simply did not have a chance to do so because they were purged long before they had the opportunity to rebel. The Iron Warriors is a little bit of a unique case here because, again, they were scattered throughout the Imperium in hundreds, if not thousands, of relatively small garrisons, intended to function as local forces, as security forces, basically, in areas that needed either a military presence to remain stable, or in areas where incursions from outside forces may be likely, various xeno-species and so on. And on that note, there aren't that many, proper fluffy points in this story. I just like it because of the action and the way it's presented. But one of the very interesting mentions is that Dantiok lost command of his great company because he was defeated by the Hrud. Apparently, the Iron Warriors had launched an extermination campaign against the Hrud, which is an alien species which has remained migratory all the way up into the 41st millennium. They are a... how do I put this? There is a fair bit of debate whether or not they are an alien species, as in a physical, biological alien creation, or whether or not they may be some form of warp-born entity. The line is not always clear-cut. There is, for example, a species of de facto space alligators who can teleport from planet to planet and travel through the warp. You could possibly argue that this was some form of natural evolution, a kind of, navigated gene that appeared spontaneously in these particular animals, but again, it almost seems a little bit well, absurd, frankly. Anywho, the Hrud's specific power is that they can actually affect the world around them in an entropic fashion. They can rapidly age both objects and people. This is, as mentioned, what reduced Dantiok to a crippled, coughing old man rather than a space marine. And the fact that the Hrud could actually do this to a space marine, a functionally immortal creature, well, that says quite a lot about their powers. And Perturabo apparently claims to have been successful in exterminating the Hrud, whilst Dantiok supposes something different. He claims that instead of successfully exterminating the Hrud, it has forced them into a migratory existence, and now they are wandering across Imperial space, wiping out worlds. And although their numbers have been severely reduced, as he mentions, quietly wiping out worlds on the Eastern Rim, was it? Can't remember quite now. But that suggests that they have been severely reduced, but they are still out there, and Perturabo apparently refuses to accept this fact, which I can absolutely believe. See, the Iron Warriors is probably my favorite traitor legion, but Perturabo, I hate Lorgar more, because Lorgar's internal philosophy is so weak, but Perturabo, he is just petulant. And he is a genuine petulant cunt. I would genuinely compare him to a vengeful, angry child, but in this case, with superpowers. When things don't go the way he wants them to, he gets angry, he gets upset, and he expects unreasonable things of others. I'll go into details on this on the Perturabo lore video, but the way he behaves himself and the way he expects respect from his brothers, but refuses to show any indication as to why they should respect him, is just like, I really genuinely think that the comparison to a petulant, spoiled, and misbehaving child is probably the closest one to Perturabo you're going to be getting from me, honestly. Again, I'll do a bit more of a deep dive into his psyche when I make an actual video on him, but for now, let us move on to the final story, Savage Weapons. This story takes place on the planet of Tsagulsa, which some of you may remember from my recent Conrad Curse video. This was where Curse would eventually go to ground and live out the last few of his days, feeling, bad for himself, in all due essentiality. Already at this relatively early stage, he has begun to plan for this eventual end, showing perhaps once again that Conrad's fate was perhaps less unavoidable and perhaps brought into being by his own actions. But that is not really the point of this short story. It is showing us a piece of the so-called Shadow Crusade, where the Lion tries and mostly fails to bring Conrad Curse to bear, to finally hunt down the Night Haunter and put an end to his rampage through the sector. Whilst on the other hand, Conrad Curse has been dispatched here specifically to tie down the Lion. The Dark Angels are one of very few intact loyal legions still within the galaxy, and Horus would like to keep them occupied for as long as possible. So Conrad flees and the Lion chases, both parties catching one another's fleets, catching one another's deployments, burning one another's worlds, and so on, in a seemingly endless conflict. Until Conrad puts out a little bit of an olive branch, asking the Lion to meet him on the planet of Tsagulsa, where he tries to bring the Lion over to his side? Well, I don't actually know if that is what he is trying to do, really. Conrad Curse's ability to see into the future is a wee bit of a plot device on multiple occasions. In this case, he seems to know that convincing the lion is pointless. Curse is never going to succeed in convincing the lion of the righteousness of Horus's cause. Partially because, well, Conrad doesn't believe in the righteousness of Horus's cause. At this point, one could certainly argue that Curse is playing a role, more so than really acting out any of his own ambitions or desires. He is now simply the Night Haunter. He is a traitor for no other reason than because he has always seen himself as such. That is the path he must follow, and he believes that the moment to avoid that future has already come and gone, and has so surrendered himself to the inevitable. Why he would then get in contact with the lion, well, it is an interesting one. Maybe it is simply a part of the future that Conrad has seen, and so he's just going through the motions. But I don't think so. He seems melancholic about all of this. He seems genuine in his attempt to turn the lion, even trying to use the schism within the Dark Angels, something the lion is as of yet unaware of, to spark a debate, to try and convince the lion that he's on the wrong side, because he will be remembered as a traitor, so he may as well be a traitor. Of course, this again is not a very good rhetorical tool when used against a lion who is, again, completely unaware of their schism. There are a lot of little things that don't seem to make a whole lot of sense here in Conrad Curse's actions, but I think it could possibly be explained by something that the lion says. The lion professes that he viewed Conrad Curse as his only true brother, because they both grew up uncorrupted by civilization. They both grew up savage, essentially. Now, I would argue that Conrad Curse didn't really grow up outside of civilization in the way that the lion did, but I guess we would be entering into the realms of semantic at that point. It just strikes me as a little off that the lion would have this, well, not love, but at the very least, feeling of kinship with Curse, because the two are extraordinarily different creatures. Or perhaps the lion has seen some vague, twisted echo of himself. The lion tried to make Caliban better, tried to turn a death world into a paradise, and maybe he understands that Conrad Curse was trying something similar, albeit in a very, very different fashion, with Nostramo. And if this is the case, and if Conrad Curse saw this in one of his visions, well, Curse always wanted a friend, a comrade. As we see in his Primarch book, he spits acidically with resentment that there was no friends for Conrad Curse, something he blames the Emperor for, because the Emperor made him into a monster, and a monster cannot possibly have comrades. So maybe Curse saw this conversation play out and thought, maybe, just maybe, there is the chance that I could finally gain a friend from this. And whilst that may seem ridiculous, especially as, well, one, this is the lion, a truly loyal son of the Emperor, and he probably also saw, or maybe he didn't see. This is the problem with Conrad Curse's premonitions of the future. They are accurate just often enough, in Conrad Curse's own words, so that he could not ignore them. But the lion chooses to essentially ambush Curse, and use this as an opportunity to try and put him down for good. Presumably, Curse didn't see this, or possibly he did, because he does again seem to realize that convincing the lion is essentially hopeless. But once more, Conrad Curse has never had a confidant, a friend, a comrade, somebody who he could view as an equal, as a genuine friendship. He has his followers within his legion, certainly, but even Sevatar, one of those that he is closest to, he has at this point condemned to death by painting his gauntlet arterial red, which is a sign of censor and a sign that eventually, at Conrad Curz's leisure, Sevatar will be executed. Fascinating little tradition, that, by the way. But to return to the point, Conrad is extraordinarily lonely, to put it quite simply. He is desperate for that companionship that has been denied to him his entire life, and that deep down he probably knows that he has denied himself. And in such a position, is it any wonder that he would grasp at any straw, no matter how frail or impossible it may seem? I certainly think we could rationalize Conrad Curz's choices here, albeit perhaps with a bit more effort than should be necessary. The story is also a welcome look at Sevatar, who's a really damn cool personality. It also gives us a small glimpse into the Dark Angel's Legion at this point, but not much, honestly, and just a tiny little peek into the Night Lords as well, with the whole red gauntlets and so on. But mostly it's just a story about the Lion and Curse, their interaction and their eventual fight with one another, which, well, Aaron Dembski-Bowden wrote this, so you know who fucking won that fight. It was never even in doubt. Though, I will give Aaron credit for this story being one of very few, in my opinion, stories he has written, where the Loyalists are not complete bumbling retards, so that's nice. He even gives the Dark Angels a little bit of credit, saying that, oh yeah, the Lion was a much superior swordsman and fighter to Curse, but then Curse just, goes like, fuck this, and throws himself at the Lion. And that works. He bowls him over and overpowers him. Now, of course, if the Lion really was that much of a superior swordsman, I would think that an enemy simply flinging himself at you would probably be the easiest thing to counter in the galaxy. Literally just lift up your sword tip and allow the enemy to impale himself on it. But, hey, as mentioned, it is a Bowden story, so I guess we shan't question too much, really. And with that, I will wrap up this video. The anthologies are interesting, but I do feel as if they are a little bit too generalistic. Most of them are too short to really have all that much of truly interesting information in them. Just a couple tidbits here and there, like Sagulsa, for example. That's quite interesting. And some of them are good stories just in and of themselves, like The Iron Within, for example, and also introduces some cool characters like Dantiok. Rules of Engagement was probably the most valuable of these stories as far as lore insight goes, because it gives us a great deal of information about the Codex Astartes, how the Ultramarines took to it, how it was introduced, how they tested it, and how Guilliman himself viewed this greatest of all his works. And of course, almost inevitably, in an anthology, we do get a couple of weaker works as well. Liar's Due and Forgotten Sons I don't think were particularly good, but, well, Faces of Treachery, Rules of Engagement, The Iron Within, these I do believe made up for it overall. I'd definitely say it was worth a read. But, well, I do definitely prefer the more long-form stories at the end of the day. And speaking of at the end, I would like to request a little bit of feedback on this one, because on the one hand, I was requested to do the anthology stories. On the other, after having done one, I'm kind of sitting here and wondering how worthwhile it truly was. So please do tell me if you liked it, if you want me to do the other ones, or if you want me to skip through them because there isn't that much relevant information, or if the, considerably different storylines gets a little bit confusing in this kind of format, because I can definitely see how it is. if they already get a little bit short and undercooked when you listen to them back to back in audiobook after having read them like I did, I can imagine that listening to them in a sort of summed up, almost reviewy style like this could also be an odd experience. But for now, I shall bid you adieu. Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below, and until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Until then, have a good day.